Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we're going to do the breakdown of this big slate for FanDuel that starts at 7 p.m. today for baseball. Really big slate, lots of good pitching options here, and a great amount of teams that you could potentially stack. Several teams to choose from stacking-wise. San Diego and Colorado are playing in Colorado. That game has an 11.5 spread, so both teams there are stackable. San Francisco is playing Arizona, and they're very stackable. The Yankees right-handed hitters, the Houston right-handed hitters, the White Sox, and even the Dodgers right-handed hitters, all in stackable situations. So with that said, let's go and get into the players themselves. From the catching perspective, our first option is going to be Shohei Ohtani. Ohtani, 8 of the last 10 games over 34 fantasy points. 7 of those have been over 39. He's had 2 bad games in there, sub 10. One of those he had a blister on his finger. But other than that, he's been pretty much really dominant. And he's had big time upside due to K's most of the games. The only real downside he has is the fact that a lot of times he doesn't get the win because of his team, but he does tend to get quality starts, so I think he's a great option on this particular slate. But overall, there's going to be several good options here, so you don't have to live by him, but I still think he's one of the top options on the slate. Then I'm going to talk about Carlos Rodon for San Francisco. Now, he's been extremely good lately. In 3 games against Arizona this season, he's had 52, 33, and 24 points. He has 40-point upside, and he did get at least 7 strikeouts. Now, the only catch in this particular situation is this game is probably going to have a higher run total because of the warmth at the stadium, and so there's a potential issue from that perspective just because it's going to become it's already a hitter-friendly park in Arizona, and this is going to make it more hitter-friendly. So we do have to keep that in mind at this particular situation. But overall, he's still a really solid option in this particular slate. Then we'll look at Chris Bassett for the New York Mets. Bassett is going up against Oakland, and I really like him, except for the fact that Oakland has been hitting the ball extremely well. Now, Bassett has been somewhat boom or bust, but overall, I think he's a solid option if you don't mind taking the risk of Oakland being extremely good again. But he doesn't always get enough strikeouts as some of the other guys, so he's not the most ideal option on the slate, but he's still a pretty decent one. Then we're going to look at Bradley Singer for the Kansas City Royals. Now, oddly enough, he has been really good on FanDuel because he gets strikeouts and stuff, and he just seems to get pretty deep in the games too most of the time. He's had a lot of quality starts, and he gets a pretty decent chunk of wins when he plays. And he also just doesn't really give up many earned runs very often. He's had a lot of shutout games. And so he has 40-point upside here, which I was a little bit surprised because he doesn't seem like, the best pitcher on the slate by any stretch, but he has a lot of upside in this particular matchup. And so I think he's somebody you got to consider. I don't think he's the top option by any stretch, but he definitely scores more points than you'd expect. And so that's pretty much what I'm going to showcase at pitcher. The only other guy I'm going to mention is Garrett Cole for the Yankees. He's a little less, got less upside than some of the other options. He's been scoring about 30 points per outing, and he isn't the most ideal because of who he's facing, Boston. But he's had 36, 61, 30, and 12 fantasy points against them this season. So he is somebody to consider. I just don't think he's as good of an option as Ohtani or Bassett or Rodon. So with that said, let's go and get into the players that I like here. At catcher and first base, we actually have several good options here. And keep in mind, on FanDuel, you can put a guy in the utility option. So today might be the situation where you want to throw one of these guys at the catcher or first base into that utility, because there's lots of good options. Some of the other positions are a little bit more limited than normal as well. So to start off, we're going to look at Josh Bell. Now, I don't really like Josh Bell very often, but in Colorado, this is a big upside game for him. And he's extremely boom or bust. But at this particular situation, the last time they were in San Francisco, he did against Colorado, in Colorado, he did pretty well. And so I suspect that he has some opportunity to do that again. His price here also helps make that useful. If CJ Cron plays, then he's going to be a top-tier option for this particular setup. He's got a good matchup, and then obviously he's in Colorado, so all the Colorado players do really good there. Then we're going to look at Albert Pujols. Now he is trying to chase to get to 700 home runs. So while he's playing, he's actually hitting pretty good. He's had a couple off games here, but some of these games he pinch hit in. But overall, he's been having some solid games, and so I think he's somebody at this price point is almost too cheap not to at least take a look at based on his production. Pete Alonso, he's averaging 16 fantasy points a game for the last 10 games, and he's got a nice plus matchup here against for Irvin, who he should be able to take long in this particular game. I think he's been hitting the ball extremely well as of late, and his price actually isn't as high as I expected it to be, and so that's something, he's somebody to consider here. Then I have two catchers, Will Smith and Austin Nola. I don't really think it's ideal to use either one on this particular slate. Austin Nola, though, is a little bit interesting simply because he's playing in Colorado, and obviously neither one of those guys are going to be super over exciting on FanDuel, but they're more useful on DraftKings. But I just wanted to mention them as kind of secondary options here. And then we're going to look at Josh Naylor, who's been pretty solid as of late. He's having some really big games last few games. He was kind of in a slump before that, so I'm glad he's finally getting out of it, and he's going up in a plus matchup here. And so I do think he's in a great spot to have a good game, and his price isn't too crazy here. And then we're going to look at Wilmer Flores. Now, San Francisco is playing in Arizona, and it's going to be extremely warm, and it's going to really have a bonus for bats. Arizona is one of the better places for batters, and he's been hitting the ball pretty well, even before he had a slump a little bit before the Colorado games, but he did pretty good against the Dodgers, and so I suspect he's going to have a good series here against Arizona, and his price is just way too cheap for his potential production. Jose Abreu is another guy I like here against Detroit. He's got a nice plus matchup here, and he's been hitting the ball extremely well as of late. I really like his price point too. He's not over expensive or anything, and so I think he's a good option. And then finally, Nathaniel Lowe, where'd you go? For Texas, it's not the most ideal matchup, but he's been playing pretty good lately, and I really like him in this setup, and his price point's pretty fair for what he's doing. So at second base, we have some pretty decent options here. It was a little bit harder to find good options here, but I will also add that some of these options are available to play in third base and shortstop and even a couple outfielders, so that is an advantage at this position as well. So we have Brandon Drury, who obviously can play second and third base, on FanDuel at least, and he's playing again in Colorado, so he's got some upside for this particular matchup. And he's had some really massive games, and this is the type of situation where he could have another one. Jake Cronenworth is another guy that you could take a look at. He's been hitting the ball actually pretty good lately, and this being in Colorado is really going to be helpful to give him more opportunity. Then we're going to look at Jose Altuve, who may or may not play based on it being kind of banged up a little bit. But he is Jose Altuve, still averaging 13 fantasy points a game for the last 10. So he's always somebody you got to take a look at. Then we have Marcus Semien for Texas. He's in a really solid spot. He's been hitting the ball extremely well, and his price isn't all that expensive. And then we look at Tommy Edman. Tommy Edman hasn't been hitting the ball quite as well as of late, but he has some real upside in this matchup against the Dodgers, who aren't in a great pitching situation. And he's pretty inexpensive. Then we're going to look at Thairo Estrada. He's way too cheap for his potential production here. He strikes me as a really great option for the utility spot, especially at his price point of only $2,500. So at third base, we're going to start with Manny Machado. He has been hitting the ball pretty good lately, but not as good as we like, because he's been a bit boom or bust. But this Colorado matchup is really going to be a bonus for him, and if he can hit a home run or two in these games, that's going to really pay off. Then Nolan Arenado, he's playing against the Dodgers, and the Dodgers pitcher is not as good as normal, and so I really like St. Louis's opportunity here, especially Arenado, who's been playing pretty well as of late. Then we'll look at Jose Ramirez, for Cleveland. I like using guys against John Gray sometimes, especially guys that are super hot. And he has absolutely been scorching lately. And so I think he's a great option on this particular slate, though he's a little bit more expensive. And then we have Kim for San Diego. Another guy that's been kind of up and down recently. He went through a little bit of a slump, but he's been hitting the ball better as of late. And this is a nice plus matchup to give him some more opportunity to hit the ball extremely well. And to get some, to find somebody that I like from the Colorado Rockies side of things, Monteiro looks like he's in a great spot. He hits the ball pretty solidly, even away, which is unusual for some of these Colorado players. But obviously this game is in Colorado, so he has a huge advantage. And then we're going to look at Alex Bregman. He's averaging 12 fantasy points a game, and I really think he's hitting the ball pretty good, but not as good as we'd like. But he's in a nice plus matchup here. As for a shortstop, we have 5 different options here to look at. The first being Trey Turner, who's just, before the last couple of games, was just having some massive games. And this is a good spot for him to have a good game here. His price has also come down a little bit. Seager, for Texas, is also in the position to have a really solid game. He's actually just been hitting the ball extremely well lately, and so I like him in this matchup against Cleveland, and his price isn't too expensive today. Texas is sort of a sneaky stack. I don't think a lot of people are going to get too high on Texas simply because there's so many better options on the match. Then we're going to look at Lindor, who has been very boom or bust, but he's in a nice plus situation against Baltimore. And then finally, one of my favorite options, Elvis Andrus, who's averaging almost 13 fantasy points a game. He has been absolutely killing the ball as of late. Even though he had a couple games against Cleveland's top pitchers the last 2 days, he's going to come back down to having a pretty below average pitcher tomorrow, or rather today, which he's going to have some opportunity to really score some points. He's also a steal threat, so that's always an advantage as well. Then we're going to look at the outfielders. So to start off, we're going to start with Juan Soto, who's still just too cheap for his potential production, especially for the fact he's now in Colorado. His price has been way down because of him being kind of off lately. Same kind of goes for Mookie Betts, who just had the walk-off hit to win the game in the yesterday's game where he pinch hit. He's in a great spot. He's been hitting the ball extremely well most of the time, but he's kind of been in a little bit of a slump, which is what caused his price to go down. But he's a home run threat every time he comes up to bat, and this is a great matchup for him. Then we look at Jurkison Profar, and I'm only using him because of the fact that this is in Colorado. His price here on FanDuel is actually useful, simply because he could break out of a slump here. His last game against St. Louis was really good, but before that, he's been at a pretty deep slump for a little while. Then we're going to look at Yordan Alvarez for Houston. Now, his price is pretty expensive, but he's in a good spot here, and he could have one of those hallmark games where he scores 30 or 40 points, if which he's capable of doing. Aaron Judge is somebody I don't like to roster because his price is so expensive. You can literally afford 2 good batters with him. But in this game versus Rich Hill, the fact of the matter is he has like 2 home run potential in this game, and it's going to be interesting to see how you could fit him in, like mixing with some of the Colorado and San Diego team players. But I don't know that it's going to be that easy to fit him in, but he might be able to. Then Randall Grichuk for Colorado. I'm not sure if I've ever utilized him in a fantasy game before, but he does stack up in this particular matchup just because of the terrible pitching on that end. He just doesn't play all the time, so you have to check to see if he's actually going to play. But if he does play, he's going to be somebody you could take a look at a near really low price. Then Mr. Kyle Tucker is an option. He's not as good an option as some of the other guys, but his price is relatively decent. If you need him in utilities, if for $4,100 in utility, he'd be the way to go. Then we have a couple more options. Taylor Ward, he's in a nice plus matchup for the Angels. I think that you could stack Ward, Trout, and then Lingifo in this particular situation, potentially, if you really wanted to. But it's not my top stack, but he's still hitting the ball well enough that it doesn't make sense for his price to be as low as it is. And then a couple guys more. A.J. Pollock for the Chicago White Sox. He's just way too cheap for his production potential here. Obviously, he's been a little bit of a drought up and down a little bit, but this matchup is so good. They've been facing some really tough pitchers for Chicago, the White Sox have. And now that they're not going to, I think he and a couple others are going to bounce back. Which leads me to the last guy, which is Eloy Jimenez, who's absolutely just been having great game after great game after great game. And I suspect that he's going to have another good one here as well. So with that said, I think we have a really solid stack, a really solid set of games, excuse me. And if you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Make sure to check out Discord and make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We really do appreciate all the people in Discord and all the subscribers and the liking of the videos. So please continue to keep doing that. And have a nice day, guys.